Okay, welcome to my shop. Before we take a little tour, let me tell you a little bit about the space and how it came to be. So this shop is located in the basement of our home. It's 14 and a half feet in that direction and 25 and a half feet in that direction with 8-foot ceilings. Our basement is a daylight basement because our house is located on a bit of a hill. So that end of the basement in that direction is below grade. This end of the basement where my shop is located is above grade. So I get a window and a door back there that goes to the backyard with direct access to the outside. When we moved into this house in 2011, this was an unfinished basement. There was only one circuit, electrical circuit for the entire basement that provided the electricity for just a few bulbs hanging around and like 1 or 2 outlets. Redid the electrical so that I could get more lights down here and separate out into a couple other circuits, some circuits for power. Created a shop space over in that direction by using some shelves, and then on the inside of the shelves I hung extra tall clear shower curtain liners, and that was essentially my shop until early 2019. By that point I had acquired a lot more tools, was using my shop a lot more, and just realized that I needed a dedicated space. So I started talking to my wife about finishing a space to be a dedicated shop. And we talked about it a little bit and went back and forth and decided that what I would actually do is finish the entire basement. I used SketchUp and I drew up some plans, finally settled on a particular layout and a plan. And then in April of 2019, I got started on finishing the basement. And it was a long project. We have 4 kids with life and everything else going on. I couldn't work on it all the time. April of 2020, I had things to the point where I was mostly focused in that first year on finishing the rest of the basement. And so by that point, the rest of the basement was in a functional standpoint. Like all that was really left was just a lot of trim work. Shifted my focus to working on this space. Having a functional shop would be very beneficial to doing all the trim work. So by about June 2020, I got this space to be at least, functional. And at that point I shifted into where I was kind of just going back and forth. I'd do a little bit of trim work. I'd split my time doing that and continuing to build out my shop. And again, that was a slow process, but by May of 21, really everything was complete. Well, the rest of the basement was complete. All of that, the trim, everything's done, and the rest of the basement. My shop, I hesitate to say it's complete because I don't know that my shop will ever be complete. I'll always have shop projects in mind, but it was complete enough that I no longer felt like I was working on my shop. Okay, so we'll start the tour here at my workbench. I built this workbench when my shop was in the shower curtain stage. It's served me well for a number of years, but it's not great. At that point, what I decided to do for the tabletop was I sandwiched together a 3/4 inch sheet of plywood, 3/4 inch piece of MDF, and then topped it with a piece of 1/4 inch hardboard. And it's got a lot of weight to it. It has worked well for a number of years, but it's time to move on. In the near future, I will be either building a new one from the ground up, ripping the top off and building a new top, or purchasing a new workbench. So I'll be sad to see it go, but I'll be excited to get a new workbench. So here in this corner of my shop, we have my dust collector. This is an Oneida Air Systems V2000. When I bought this years ago, you could get a 1.5, a 2, or a 3 horsepower. Now they only have the 1.5 and the 3. So, but I love it. It works great. Although there's an interesting story about how I overfilled my bin on my website. I will put a link to the blog article where I described how I overfilled my dust bin and absolutely ruined the filter on my dust collector at some point, which prompted me to install a window in the dust bin so that I will know when the dust bin's getting full. Another thing to mention on the dust collector is this pressure gauge. This is also related to the story I was talking about with the overfilled dust bin and ruining the filter. So this is a back pressure gauge for the filter. You can see the hose here. The hose runs along. It connects to the plenum just before the filter. And so this, when the dust collector's on, this gives you a reading of the back pressure on the filter. So the installation of this is also discussed in that same blog article that will reference in the comments below. Then this is my air compressor. This is a Hulk Power 2 horsepower, 20-gallon air compressor I got from a website called Air Compressors Direct. It's an oilless air compressor, but it isn't wicked loud. Another great upgrade I did, it's an airline system. It came with almost everything I needed. I had to buy a couple of fittings just for how I put it into my shop. This air compressor has 2 outlets. So one I can plug in here. The other one is connected a fixed air hose system that goes around the shop and gives me 3 drops around the shop. And the reason why that was such a great upgrade is because before installing that, if I needed to use air anywhere in my shop, I had hoses draped across the floor, which was just a pain. It was a mess, and I was always tripping over the hoses. And so this has been great. Now I have a small coil hose that I plug into one of either here at the air compressor or one of the other 3 drops, and I have air right where I need it. Okay, next we'll talk briefly about my drill press. This is a Jet JDP 17 floor drill press. Got it several years ago as a birthday present. So early on, I put a mobile base on the bottom. It's a Portamate mobile base that you use a piece of plywood in order to make a platform for the base. And then this last year, I've made 2 significant upgrades. I got this Woodpecker's DP Pro 36 fence and drill press table. The other is that I got this book called Tools and Jigs for the Efficient Small Shop. And as you can see right on the cover, there's a cabinet for a drill press. So I adapted the plans to work with the mobile base that I already had, changed the drawer configuration a little bit, just adapted things to be how I wanted them and for my drill press, and built this cabinet down here. And this has been a great upgrade. Can always use more storage. It's very convenient to have this storage right here at the drill presses, so this is where I keep all my drill bits. So talk real quick about the Mini-Split and the heating and air for my shop. So early on, when I was designing the whole basement, I knew that I wanted to keep the heating and air for this space separate from the rest of the basement and therefore the rest of the house. The door coming into this space is a exterior grade door actually, so it stays nice and sealed, and it works great. It's a Samsung, it's a 12,000 BTU, that it's really overpowered for this size shop. It would keep the temperature down just fine, but it wouldn't keep the humidity down. It's overpowered to the point where it doesn't run long enough when it's cooling to effectively draw moisture out of the air. So the way I solve that is I have a dehumidifier. It's a small desiccant dehumidifier, just something to be aware of, that you really want a properly sized unit if you're going to be installing a Mini-Split for a space. Otherwise you may find that you don't have the right balance of temperature and humidity. All right, so in addition to my dust collector, of course, to have a shop vac, I ended up going with this Fine Turbo 1. It's been great. I really like this. It's a very small footprint, but it's a very powerful shop vac. I added a Clearview separator for shop vac. Clearview, it's a CV06, kind of a elaborate contraption here just to keep it all together, but the bucket fits real nicely on top of the shop vac. Having the separator is great because the vast majority of everything ends up in the bucket. Sure, eventually I'll have to change the bag just because it'll be clogged with dust, but it will never fill up. Also mention that here's a little window that I added to the side of the bucket. I did it at the same time that I added the window to the dust bin on the dust collector. Okay, next I'll talk briefly about my bandsaw. Before I do that, let me talk real quickly about the electrical system and the lighting. A nice benefit of designing and building my own shop was I had complete control over what I did for the electrical system. So right behind the bandsaw here is the sub panel that I installed for the shop, and it's a 100 amp sub panel. In there I have 2 30 amp 220 volt circuits. I have 4 20 amp 220 volt outlets. And then I have 6 20 amp 120 volt circuits. Each of those has 5 or 6 outlets on it. And I have 1 15 amp lighting circuit. For the lighting, I have all the fixtures are a high CRI LED fixtures. I have a total of 15 fixtures. I have 10 4-foot light fixtures, 5 on each side of the shop. And then in this middle area here to fill in between the 2 sides, I have 5 2-foot fixtures. On the bandsaw, this is a Laguna 1412. I love the bandsaw, have it wired for 220. For the light for the bandsaw and for the mobile base, I went a little different. I didn't do the Laguna stuff. So the Laguna, for this bandsaw, they sell a wheel, a mobility kit where there's a single wheel on the front and 2 wheels in the back. I didn't really care for that too much in terms of stability, so I have a Portamate base on it. And then for the lighting, there is a light kit that will bolt on right here But instead, I just got this cheap LED with a magnetic base. And what I like about it is I can attach it in a lot of different places, which turns out to be real handy. And it's plenty bright enough. I can move it around. I can reattach it in different places. Okay, next talk briefly about my planer. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. It's a DeWalt DW735, which I feel like you see all over the place. I did install the Wixie digital gauge on it, which is really nice and convenient and surprisingly easy to install. I also put a Bird Helix helical cutter head in it. Also a really nice upgrade. Expensive, but boy does it cut nice. Whenever I need to use it, I roll it out and through this space over here and over to my workbench that we talked about earlier. The infeed and outfeed of the planer sit just a fraction of an inch above the work surface on the table. I feed the wood in and then it comes out onto the workbench. Okay, I wanted to take just a minute to talk about the ducting that I use for my dust collector system. So on the ducting, it's often referred to as Nordfab ducting. Nordfab is a particular brand, so this isn't Nordfab brand, but it's that style of ducting that clamps together. This is actually called clamp together ducting from Blaskate Company. There'll be a link below, so you can go to their website. Very old school, like you look up the catalog online, you pick out all the pieces you need, write them down, you call and talk to a guy and tell him what you need and order them that way. But I went through a design process with a number of different places, never could get a design that I really liked or that I felt like was really gonna work for my shop. So I finally just scrapped that whole idea, designed my own, found Blaskate Company. And so I designed it all myself, figured out what all the pieces were that I needed, called them up and ordered it all. And they've been great. There've been a couple of times where I've forgotten things and realized it a day after I placed my order or whatever, or once the stuff got here, and I would call them and they were great about just, shipping something right out to me, even though it was my fault. So I have nothing but good things to say about Blaskate Company. Okay, real quickly while we're over in this area, I just wanted to mention this little guy. This is an old 15-inch Delta scroll saw that I picked up at an estate sale for I think about $25. I don't use it a lot, but when I need it, I'm really glad that I have it. So it sits on this it came with this old little table and stand. I built a little mobile base for it, and I have sitting under here a bench grinder, and sometime in the very near future, I'm going to build a flip cart for these two items so that they'll take up the same amount of floor space as they do now, but the top will flip over. And again, that same book I talked about storage solutions for a small shop, it has plans for a flip top cart for just this sort of thing. So that is on my short list of things to do for my shop here soon. Well, next we'll talk about my jointer. So this is a Jet JJ8CS. I bought this off of Craigslist several years ago. It was in pretty good shape. It needed some work. I had to replace some parts that the guy had lost or thrown away. It needed to be cleaned really well. I replaced the belts. Also put in it, so the CS in the model name stands for that it had originally was a straight cutter head. The cutter head was not in good shape, so I replaced it, and I replaced it with a helical cutter head. Replaced the 4-inch dust port on the side with a 6-inch dust port. Put it on a mobile base so I can roll it out from the wall when I need more in-feed or out-feed capacity. I can move it around. Once I got it all adjusted and cleaned and all the upgrades done, it works really well. Also over here you can see this is my clamp storage. So there's French cleat all over this wall here behind the jointer. Most all the clamps are on holders that look like this with the cleat on the back. And they work out to be really strong. When I get some more clamps, I can move this around and rearrange things. I heard it said that a woodworker can never have enough clamps, and I agree. So at some point I may have to expand where I store my clamps or rearrange this again, but right now it works really well for me. And there's, I'll come up with these little, for specialty items. So there's just for like specialty clamps, and it's again, just something, use scraps, put a French cleat on the back, and then you have a really flexible way to store an odd item on the wall. Last, over in this corner, I'll mention is at the end of my duct run here, I have a floor sweep, which is super handy if you've ever used a floor sweep with a dust collection system for cleaning up. I have a Blaskate on the end, and that comes in handy if I'm using the dust collection system with just a single smaller port. I can open this up partially and allow the dust collector to get a little more airflow, which improves the performance and doesn't starve the the motor of flow. Also, the idea is that this is also a place where I can add on to the system later if need be. We have now, if you're not sure, we started in that corner over there where the door comes in from the rest of the basement, and now we've moved across to the far corner where I said we have a door out into the backyard. And now we'll start heading back around towards the other door and do the other half of the shop. Okay, here on what I think of as the back wall of my shop, I have some wood storage. It's just two Portamate wood racks along here with the spacing kind of set at different lengths so that I can store shorter and longer stuff. Intentionally made it high enough where there's a little over 4 feet of clearance underneath so I can have sheet goods here. I don't really have a big sheet goods storage area. I don't keep a lot of sheet goods. Okay, moving on to what is often thought of as the heart of any shop is my table saw. And so this is a table saw router table combo. I had this table saw in my previous shop. When I moved into this space, I upgraded to this Incra fence system and router table system. It's all kind of an integrated package I bought. So the fence is the fence for the router table and for the table saw. I really love the Incra system and the LS positioner. It's really nice. And obviously with the shop size being what it is, having the router table incorporated in with the table saw is really a great thing, saves a lot of space. So right overhead here, there is a Rikon 62-400. This table saw, it's a Grizzly G0833P. It says their Polar series. I'm not exactly sure what that means other than the cabinet is white instead of green like most of the Grizzly stuff. It's considered a hybrid table saw. It's worked really well for me. 2 horsepower, 220 volt. It's on a mobile base, as is most everything here. A little bit more difficult with the router table attached, but it can be done. I've done it a couple of times. So another thing is the folding outfeed table, and I'll show how that operates. Really handy. Again, I don't have a lot of space, so it stays down most of the time so that I have more room to walk around and work. But when I need the outfeed table, I just fold it up, put the legs down, and good to go. And then I can fold it back down and get it out of the way. One more quick note on the table saw router table setup is this rather unfortunate 6-inch dust collection hose that I have going across the floor here. One of the problems I had with all the designs I got for the dust collection was they always wanted to have a drop come down right in the center of the shop to provide dust collection to these two items. I have it going across the floor. I know it's not ideal, it's a trip hazard. However, I'm really used to it. I never even think about it anymore. I can just go right over it. And so I'm perfectly happy with how it works. Okay, next talk for a minute about my miter saw station. Modeled it in SketchUp once I decided on where it was gonna go. Try to have at least 8 feet from the blade to that wall. I decided to go with just drawers for the storage everywhere and been really happy with that. Honestly, like just having all of these drawers for storage has just been huge. I mentioned it, but in that corner, I don't know if you can see it at all, but I left a space and built 2 bins over there for offcut storage. So for dust collection, I've built this hood over the top. There are 2 4-inch dust ports in the bottom behind the saw that go down and through a channel on this side and connect over here to a 6-inch pipe that goes back. I've considered, and I may at some point, if I ever replace the saw and redo the dust hood, I may just attach a single 6-inch port to the side. Didn't think about it until after I had hooked it up, but I did the math. The cross section of a single 6-inch pipe is greater than the combined cross section of 2 4-inch pipes. And as anybody who's used a miter saw knows, miter saws make dust fly everywhere. So the more air you can have drawing that dust away from your face, the better. But overall, I'm happy with how the dust collection works. It does work well. This platform that the miter saw sits on rides on 2 blocks. So there's a large block under here and a block under here. Bolts that in slots in those blocks. And so those blocks can move up and down. But to adjust the height of the blocks, each block sits on 2 bolts. And those bolts, I can adjust, fine tune the height and the level in 4 points of this platform. And then once it's all set, I lock those 2 blocks in, just have a couple of screws to attach the platform to the blocks. And if I do replace the saw or things get a little out of whack over time, it's easy to adjust. I decided to just go with a track embedded in the surface here to the left and not have a fence. I prefer to have an uninterrupted surface here. So, and then again, behind there, a lot of French cleat. Over on this side, I have a bunch of boxes I've built that I keep woodworking magazines and books and stuff in. And so that's the miter saw station. Okay, next up we have this downdraft table. 4-panel downdraft kit that's made by PowerTech. You can get it on Amazon. There'll be a link below. 2 large 4-inch dust ports underneath. So these 2 4-inch hoses provide the dust collection for those 2 ports. And then underneath is a cabinet with sliding doors. Most of the sanding supplies there, or I have sheets of sanding paper here just in some plastic like file trays. For a minute here, we'll talk about these 2 columns. Inside of each one of these columns is a 4 or 5-inch steel post. There wasn't really anything I could do about the location of the posts. The columns are here, they're not going anywhere, so I just have to figure out how to deal with it. My shop wasn't the only consideration in how we laid out the basement. I decided at some point to just embrace the fact that they were here and wrap them in these wooden columns so that I could at least attach stuff to them and use them for some storage. It does make them somewhat functional, and I could also have outlets. And the storage is actually great. Pretty much all of my woodpecker marking type stuff is on these columns. Okay, this brings me to one of the absolute best decisions I made when I built this shop, and that was installing this sink. Here in just a second, I'll get it down. I actually also created a piece that I attach here, and this becomes my sharpening station as well, and I have water available for that, for whetstones and stuff. What worked out great is that right on the other side of this wall is the bathroom that we installed in the basement, and so I was able to just tie into the supply and drain and everything that I created for that bathroom to add this utility sink. Okay, so I mentioned a minute ago how I use my utility sink as my sharpening station. I just wanted to show you what I have here is my sharpening station. Again, you can see here I have a piece of French cleat, so this whole thing hangs on a wall. And on the back side, there's a few boards that lock it in. Tables on the side of the sink and the front of the sink, and I have a few pieces. This is just that sort of grippy rubber shelf liner stuff. So these boards locks in like this right here. One piece of, it's nice and secure, and then I have a larger piece here where I put my stones and whatnot as I'm working. Get out various sharpening supplies. I have water here, can keep all the mess here contained at the sink, and do all my sharpening right here, and it works really well. Okay, we're now back where we started. I'm currently standing in the location where the camera was when we first started this tour. Just a couple things I'll mention, then we'll wrap up. So this is my desk, and it's just a real simple, a leftover piece of 3/4-inch Baltic birch from a project I built for one of my daughters last year, and a couple of heavy-duty shelf brackets. That's my desk. Over here, got a television, and it's got a sound bar, and then it's hooked to a Google TV with a Google Chromecast with Google TV streaming device, and that works great because I can use this to play music, limited to weekends if I'm watching sports while I'm down here. But what I really like is when I'm not using it for any of that, it shows a nice slideshow of recent photos of our family. And then last, behind this screen, I'll show a picture of it, but there's a mounted on the wall is a little Google Nest Mini. And so I have routines set up that start up and shut down the shop for me. And then I can also use that to, set reminders, timers, answer questions, and things like that. I hope you've enjoyed this tour. If you have, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions about anything you saw that I didn't cover, or comments or suggestions for things that I can improve or rearrange my shop, I'm always thinking about ways that I can improve things down here. Please leave those below in the comments section, and I'll do my best to address those either by replying in the comments or making a video if that seems necessary. Be sure to check out all the information that I'll put in the description below with links. Check out my website, liberatingwood.com, and I will see you next time. Okay, Google, shut down the shop.